she arrived in the United States seeking safety. Iryna Zarutska was 23 years old, born in Kiev, Ukraine, and had left her homeland with family after Russia's invasion in 2022 to build a new life in Charlotte, North Carolina. Those closest to her remembered a young woman who pursued art and design, who loved animals, who carried a creative spark even as she and her relatives tried to rebuild what war had fractured. In Charlotte, she worked ordinary jobs to support her family and learn a new language. She was, by every account from neighbors and friends, quietly ambitious and gentle. On the evening of August 22, 2025, Iryna boarded the Lynx Blue Line light rail in Charlotte's South End. Surveillance footage later released by the Charlotte Area Transit System shows her seated, wearing headphones. There is no recorded interaction between her and the man who would soon attack her. Less than 5 minutes into the ride, a man identified as Decarlos Dejuan Brown Jr, 34, produced a folding pocket knife and stabbed Iryna multiple times, including a wound to the neck. Passengers rushed to help. The train stopped within minutes. Iryna collapsed on the floor of the car and was pronounced dead at the scene. The attack was abrupt and, by the evidence publicly available, unprovoked. The suspect, Decarlos Brown, did not flee. Video and police reports show him walking calmly to another car after the attack and then removing his hoodie before stepping off the train. Charlotte police arrested him shortly after he left the train, on the platform. In the days after the killing, law enforcement compiled a criminal and behavioral history that would become central to public debate. Brown had an extensive record that included prior convictions and arrests for armed robbery, larceny, threats, and other offenses, and authorities reported previous interactions that indicated serious mental health issues. Neighbors and local coverage described episodes in which Brown showed erratic behavior. Court records and reporting note prior diagnoses and previous releases that had allowed him to return to the community. Within days, prosecutors filed state charges. On August 28, Brown was indicted on first-degree murder in connection with Iryna's death. Investigators simultaneously examined whether federal statutes applied because the killing occurred on a public transportation system. On September 9, 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice, through the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina, filed a federal criminal complaint charging Brown with committing an act causing death on a mass transportation system, a federal offense that can carry the death penalty in certain circumstances. The federal filing signaled the Department of Justice's intent to treat the killing not only as a local homicide but as a crime implicating national interests in the safety of public transit systems. The release of surveillance footage heightened public reaction. Katz publicly released the video more than 2 weeks after the attack. The footage circulated widely and provoked intense outrage and grief. Elected officials, from Charlotte's mayor to North Carolina's governor and federal authorities, issued statements expressing sorrow and promising accountability, while also calling for changes to transit safety and mental health interventions. The footage's graphic nature prompted renewed debates about public safety, bail policies, mental health treatment systems, homelessness, and how cities manage individuals with severe behavioral health needs. Some commentators framed the killing as evidence of systemic failures. Others warned against allowing a single incident to define broader policy without careful analysis of data and context. For Iryna's family, the loss compounded other hardships. Reporting indicates her father was unable to travel from Ukraine to Charlotte because of wartime restrictions and the realities of living under invasion. Her relatives and friends described the wrenching impossibility of burying her where she was from, and the unimaginable strain of grieving across continents under the shadow of ongoing conflict. Local community members and strangers alike offered support. Neighbors who had known her shared memories, and advocacy voices called for improved support networks for refugees who arrive traumatized and vulnerable. From a legal perspective, the case proceeded on 2 tracks: state prosecution for murder and federal prosecution for a transit-related homicide. The state indictment for first-degree murder attaches the most severe state-level penalty available, while the federal complaint, filed by the U.S. Attorney's Office and announced by the Department of Justice, adds the possibility of federal prosecution that treats attacks on public transit as crimes of national concern. Federal involvement also allows federal investigative resources and, in extreme cases, pursuit of the death penalty. Prosecutors emphasize they would seek to ensure the accused is not released and would pursue maximum accountability consistent with federal and state law. To understand why this particular case touched a national nerve, it helps to look at the overlap of several factors. The victim was a refugee fleeing an overseas war, making her death a poignant human story about vulnerability and the search for refuge. The attack happened in public on a commuter train, raising fears about transit safety for everyday commuters, and the accused had a long public record and histories of mental health problems, which fed into broader arguments about criminal justice, bail practices, and the care, or lack of it, for people with severe psychiatric illness. Together, those facts created an image that was quickly amplified by national media and political voices, who used the case to argue for reforms in criminal justice and public safety. At the same time, policy analysts cautioned that isolated incidents, while tragic and important, should not be used to draw broad conclusions without robust statistical context about crime trends and the role of community-based mental health services. Reporters and public officials also examined the accused's prior interactions with the criminal justice system. Public records and reporting detail a pattern of arrests, prior convictions, and behavior that suggested untreated or undertreated mental illness. In some instances noted in local reporting, Brown had been jailed and released. In others, he had been diverted or released on conditions that critics later questioned in light of this fatal attack. Those procedural details, what charges were filed previously, whether mental health diversion was used, what bail conditions were applied, vary across jurisdictions and individual cases, but in this one the sequence of prior incidents, releases, and eventual violent escalation became central to public scrutiny of how systems designed to protect both the public and vulnerable individuals operate in practice. The immediate human response in Charlotte was grief and the search for ways to honor Iryna's life. Friends, neighbors, and fellow residents gathered at vigils. Community leaders called for both safety measures and compassion. Local transit officials reviewed security protocols and temporarily increased visible staffing and patrols on the Blue Line. Transit agencies said they would reassess training for operators and station staff, examine platform security, and accelerate any planned safety improvements. At the same time, mental health advocates pressed for better crisis services, more accessible community-based treatment, and stronger coordination between police and behavioral health providers. Measures, they say, can reduce the risk of future tragedies by addressing root causes rather than only the symptoms. The Justice Department's decision to bring a federal charge in addition to the state murder charge is legally notable, but not unprecedented. Federal statutes allow the department to prosecute violent acts that occur on transportation systems, particularly when those acts implicate interstate commerce or the safety of national transit infrastructure. The federal complaint filed in U.S. District Court in Charlotte charged Brown under a statute that criminalizes acts causing death on mass transportation systems. The U.S. Attorney's Office described the filing as a measure to ensure that those who commit violence on public transportation systems are held accountable. Federal prosecutors also indicated coordination with the FBI and local law enforcement in the investigation. The federal involvement additionally reflects the political and symbolic importance attached to attacks on transit and the government's interest in deterring violence in shared public spaces. In media coverage, some outlets emphasized procedural and systemic issues, questions of bail, mental health resources, access to housing and care, while others focused on the human story of Iryna and the shocking nature of the video. Political figures seized on the case in different ways. Some used it to call for tougher law enforcement and stricter pretrial detention policies, while others urged a balanced response that also invests in mental health services. Newsrooms and analysts reminded readers that policy responses must be evidence-based, that improving safety on transit may require a combination of increased staffing and rapid response capability, environmental design changes, mental health crisis teams, community outreach, and more robust social services. The case thus functioned both as a local tragedy and as a flashpoint in national conversations about public safety policy. Beyond policy debates, corroborated personal details grounded the story in human reality. Friends described Iryna as someone who sculpted and designed clothing, who cared for animals, and who hoped the move to Charlotte would be the start of a stable life for her and her family. Those attributes, creative work, affection for animals, the immigrant narrative of seeking safety and opportunity, made her loss especially resonant in immigrant and refugee communities, where many feel both grateful for sanctuary and vulnerable to sudden tragedy. Local charities and community groups mobilized to assist the family with funeral arrangements and to provide support. Community members set up memorials, left flowers, and shared stories of small, human kindnesses that sometimes signified more than large policy gestures ever could. Finally, remember the person at the center of this tragedy. Names matter, dates matter, facts matter. Iryna was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a person whose aspirations were cut short in public and violent fashion. Reporting and reflection are necessary, but so is honoring the memory of someone who left a small constellation of people who loved her and who will now carry her absence forward. Let the facts guide us, let compassion move us, and let the public conversation that follows be anchored in both truth and care. Thanks for watching. If this episode was helpful, please like the video and subscribe to this channel. Tap the bell to get notifications when a new episode drops, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or cases you want investigated next.